Observation 1 is the resolutional analysis. The United States federal government should significantly increase the usage of microgeneration in the United States. The visa point is the framework. 1. Fiat is an act of imagination. Necessary below both teams access to the debate. Any other framework denies reciprocity and should be rejected. 2. The affirmative team has the right to find the topic reasonably through the use of parametrics with the burden of proving the topic true. 3. Policy net benefits is the best criterion for the debate allows both teams access to predictable burdens and methods of refutation. 4. Serious implications can be evaluated through the framework of the affirmative. If the methodology of the plan is flawed, the implications of criticism must be a direct effect of plan's passage. 5. Due to the fact that our words have multiplicity of meaning unless the affirmative's interpretation is shown to exclude negative, it ought to be accepted in order to avoid sentencing the PMC. 6. The PMC assigns through committing interpretations or frameworks. The discursive implications or more immediate must be paramount over the PMC discursive errors. The text. The United States federal government, through an act of Congress signed by the President, will make $40 billion available for subsidies to the installation of ground source heat pumps in the United States. Everyone should have a copy. Next is the solvency. The first argument is that people are going to install ground source heat pumps. The little a is that ground source heat pumps pay off within a period of 5 to 10 years of operation, according to the Department of Energy. The little b is that $40 billion provides for the installation costs in 2 million households in the United States. The little c is that to qualify, a household would have to be in a rural community and currently paying more than 50% of its income to housing costs, which is an estimated number of 2.3 million households in the United States. The second argument of the solvency is ground source heat pumps. The little a is that they operate based on coiled tubing that is buried 8 feet underground and is connected to a pump that circulates water through it. The little b is that the water that circulates through this is brought to the ground temperature, which is either cooler during the summer or warmer during the winter months, and then brought back up to the surface to a heat exchanger where it heats air. The little c is that this can also be used to heat hot water in place of a hot water pump. The little d is that this is 3 times more efficient than a standard air heater, according to the Department of Energy. Advantage 1, grid infrastructure. The AC point is the uniqueness. The first argument is that air conditioning, heating, and water heating make up for 65.4% of household power usage, according to the Energy Information Administration. The second argument is that the grid is weak right now. The little a is that power transformers that are used to control the voltage across different grid areas are not suited to the current level of power demands. The little b is that the main problem is that the heat and cooling cycle that is produced as people turn on their air conditioning during the summer or their heating during the winter leads to heating and cooling of the power grid. It leads to rapid deterioration as the parts cool off. It makes them break down faster. The third argument is that the grid weakness is causing failure right now. The little a is you can look at the 2011 outage in California and Arizona that was caused by an overburdened grid triggering a cascading failure that wiped out the energy for millions. The little b is that the same thing was experienced in 2003 in the New York collapse where 55 million people were without access to power. The little c is that rolling blackouts leave thousands of people without heat and access to food. Almost all food in the United States requires electricity to cook it or to refrigerate it. It means that these individuals are necessarily without food for that period of time. The little b is the link. The first argument is that the plan passes and people get ground source heat pumps. The second argument is that a massive portion of the transmitted energy is taken off of the grid, which quells the heating and cooling cycle that is otherwise created by air conditioning and heating. The third argument is that this protects people from power loss. The little a is that the grid is more stable when it isn't being overused because it was produced in on average in the 1950s when we were at only 50% of the power usage that we are at today. The little b is that that individuals are able to produce their own heating and cooling to protect against extreme environments means that even if individuals are without power, they're going to be able to use the ground source heat pumps in order to heat and cool their homes. The C support of the impacts. The first argument is that the plan prevents blackouts leading to skyrocketing oil prices. Electricity is key to the refinery process of oil and to the transmission of both oil and natural gas through pipeline. These the prices are going to rise if we don't have reliable access to electricity because there's going to be less stable production scenarios. The second argument is an increase in prices leads to increase in prices in other goods. You can look to shipped goods such as milk and bread that are going to skyrocket in prices because they necessarily need to be put on vehicles that use the gasoline that is now dramatically more expensive. You can look to the summer of 2008 that proves that when an increase in prices led to a dramatic increase in prices of other goods, which led to a dramatic decrease in consumer confidence. Economists say that the only way to prevent a collapse is to maintain consumer confidence because it represents greater than 70% of the purchasing power of the United States. So when consumers are very uncertain, then they hold on to a lot of money and it collapses the economy. The third argument is that this is also going to lead to corporate flight because companies are going to leave to areas that have more stable power where they know that their production capabilities aren't going to go out or their computers aren't going to turn off. It means that corporations are going to leave the United States. The fourth argument is that people are going to die when the United States economy collapses because it leads to internal resource struggles as a result of scarcity. This creates crime and violence where individuals go to combat with one another in order to be able to get access to the goods that they need to guarantee their livelihood, which is going to lead to a spillover to resource wars where the United States is going to, as a country, try to go to other countries to be able to get gas. They are going to attack places like Canada and Mexico to be able to guarantee their military operations in order to be able to run the generators that they need to support their bases. Means that we are going to see large-scale, localized war, which leads to the death of tens, if not hundreds of millions of individuals. Advantage 2, ruralism. The basic points that didn't exist. The first argument is that rural populations are ignored in policy considerations of the status quo. The little a is that all of the discourse focuses on suburbs and cities right now because that is where modern academia is located and where the policy considerations come from. The little b is that 59 million Americans live in rural areas. The second argument is that people in rural areas are more likely to be socioeconomically disadvantaged. The little a is that 1 in 7 rural people live below the poverty line. The little b is that 7.4 million people in the United States live in rural poverty. The little c is that of the 500 poorest counties in the United States, 459 are in rural areas. The third argument is that rural poverty is worse. The little a is that substandard housing includes a large group of farm workers living in chicken coops, shacks, or in hand-dug caves. The little b is that the poverty is invisible because the housing literally cannot be accessed by standard roads. The fourth argument is that ruralism is a place-based discrimination not encompassed by racism, sexism, or classism. The little a is that policy routinely ignores the rural people without any regard or protection for these individuals. Their lives are dictated by the urban majority, which stereotypes them and renders them powerless and disenfranchises them. The little b is that individuals in rural areas are far from utility providers. Power outages can last for weeks, can lead to death by exposure or at least serious illness through things like hypothermia or heat stroke. The B point is linked. The first is that the plan passes signifying a unique appreciation for and support of the needs of the rural. The second argument is that this is a change for the rural. Change for the rural needs to be focused on the place-specific problems such as their unique energy insecurity. The third argument is that though each rural community is different, federal policy is imperative without local and state elites benefit from the status quo and rural flounder in political irrelevance. Giving the rural control over the power eliminates the utilities' control over their lives. The D point of the impacts. The first is that the Aff deconstructs the notion that the rural is different from the urban through recognitions of their place-specific problems. The little a is that they are partially constructed as the other right now. The little c is that this is the logic of genocide.
Okay. So there will be one off. They get the ballots. So one off. And then the case will be in order, beginning with the framework at the top of the case, and then advance 1, advance 2.
What did you say with the ballots? They said that some of the ballots are wrong. Staff will confirm slides for those slides.
And then that's really good. Would you not bounce your foot? Would you not bounce your foot? I can feel a shake in the hole. That's all right. No, you're fine.
Oh, he was shaking.
Yeah, I was like, what is that?
So one off.
One off, and then the case in order. Everybody ready?
Yep.
We'll begin with the framework. The role of the judge is to evaluate the debate as a dialectical materialist. Evaluate the debate as a dialectical materialist. Here's what that means. You are a historian inquiring into the determining factors behind the primary constructive. The role of the ballot is to endorse the historical outlook of the topic with the most explanatory power. I'll repeat that one more time. The role of the ballot is you are a historian inquiring into the determining factors behind the PMC. The role of the ballot is to endorse the historical outlook of the topic with the most explanatory power. The reasons to prefer. The first particular facts are relevant arguments that without totalizing historical theory, the Aff, we can't actually solve anything. The Aff makes universal what is the trick of the capitalism argument that the methods prior to action we need to be able to decide whether or not we be able to resolve this question, which is why we are a prior question, because the capitalism is bad, we cannot solve unless we know that that's true. The second argument is that the insistence on locating all political discussion within the state is used by capitalism to destroy the universal particulars of what class consciousness and why capitalism is bad, which is why it's our interpretation as to why also your interpretation will be bad. We'll talk about that later. But the third argument is that the biggest critical cycle of resistance, first of all, because there's no status telescope argument that we are able to do to talk about these things and how it affects us individually. When we talk about it in here, we can talk about the ways in which capital affects our lives. The thesis. This is just Marxist labor theory. This will be more important on the alternative, so I want you to follow this. First is that it talks about primacy. Life is determined by wealth. Our experiences are ordered by the economic conditions we are born into. But the second part of the theory of Marxist labor theory is that universality. It totalizes theory as most which is most productive, which allows for inclusive coalition building to resist structures of power, which is international permutation, but also third is ideology. Capital impacts imposes epistemic blind spots which make up their decision making, causes us to dismiss radicalism and submit to the contours of the status quo. Their impacts are propaganda you should avoid because they don't actually talk about capitalism. The next of links. The first is fiat. Their advocacy of government action frames dialogue as democratic participation when it is instead in fact a formal strategy for legitimizing the established order. The performance of fiat pretends it is useful to advocate united return or reformism, but it is within a legal framework that is designed by the capitalist elite, which is why you can't be able to draw the feedback because this is controlled by those particular bodies. The second argument is reformism. Our argument is that you basically move the revolution. Argument that you just they do this all the time to be able to halt these things when the government just basically gives government to somebody to prevent them from fighting back. This is why capitalism always produce worse in the future. The third argument is energy production, specifically energy production. Technological fixes are the wrong approach. Arguing that profit motives means that there's no long-term solution, and they favor short-term solutions instead, which is why all your power grid arguments are in fact the reason why the power grids are bad is because of planned obsolescence. Basically, it makes you rely upon the technology system. We always make more disasters to be able to clean up later with technology. The fourth argument is Jebus paradox. The increases in production efficiency and effectiveness only magnify energy shortages and crisis because Jebus paradox indicates that the act magnifies material accumulation because energy demand ends up going up because commodity prices drop, which is why it allows us to feed more to the capital structure, which is why that is bad. The impact debate. The first is capitalism fuels imperial drive to secure new sources of expansion, structural crisis, and massive reform. Massive warfare occurs under this framework. But second argument, capitalism's destructive logic will exceed material and social spheres. There are two warnings. The first is ecological limits. There argument that the consumptive ethic of capitalism means that we always need to consume the environment more and more. We are hitting people as well as overfishing because we just are all about trying to get more capital drive. The reason point is going to be expansion. Argument that capitalism only needs 2% of labor force. There's no actual expansion. If you hit a wall, there can be no expansion in new markets. You can actually solve the economy. Third, the Turner's case. Argument the point that the determination of capital is responsible for the instrumentalization of all life. It is this logic that mobilizes and allows for the PMCs starts to happen in the first place. The reason why rural areas are secluded is because they do not actually fit into the capital structure. We cannot make money off of them, which is why that is bad. The alternative. Which accumulates into the extinction of particular bodies because it means that their destruction are inevitable in that framework. The unconditional alternative text. Vote negative to endorse the Marxist labor theory of value. Vote negative to endorse the Marxist labor theory of value. You get one.
Do you claim to collapse capitalism?
We claim to solve for the historical modes of materialism that have propped up capitalism.
The alt is our advocacy. It's all debate. First is revolutionary theories of prior question. The act is irrelevant in the grand scheme of capitalism. We should instead affirm the historical necessity of communism. There are 2 reasons why I should do the first is that we are confronted with an historic crisis of global proportions that demands of us that we take Marxism seriously, we interrogate class politics. The second argument is that voting negative acts upon the ethical necessity of criticism by bringing to the forefront the practices of violence we are complicit with. The eighth point is that condemnation is key. The affirmative politics of positive action against structural forces and disavows critical relations of power. The recent point is also that our ethical active interrogation opens a space for investigation and criticism. The third argument is that the alternative creates enmity with capital, which is key to revolutionary politics, using your ballot to mass prove points of the epistemology. The eighth point is that anti-capitalist methods are likely if we win that social antagonisms are rooted in material inequalities, then vote negatively. The recent point is that capital determines knowledge through intellectual hegemony first, because our responsibility is to carve out a space where y'all can emerge territorially and neutralize specific sites of oppression like the status quo, as it is fermentation. But the fourth argument is that post-capitalist society solves first. There's 3 ones: the Zapatistas, the earth homes in the Midwest, the centralized energy self-sustaining. They are now self-sustaining based on their own energy modes, but also there's thousands of eco villages right now in every single state, which is why we have we have alternatives to the status quo. On the framework debate, on the case, there are a few arguments. The first is you say that fiat is a sort of reciprocal act that allows both sides. Our argument that is in fact that's fine. Our argument is, first of all, the criticism links to your methodology. You should have to defend all these questions. But furthermore, the second link, the first link is that this adds to this framework interpretation because our argument is that fiat disempowers us and simply gives more power to the states, which means was that bad. But the next argument you say is predictable. Wars are first of all argument is you can't just exclude arguments because it's not predictable arguments. If you always be able to say sexist or racist things because it wasn't predictable, that is probably bad. But also you should be able to defend you have to defend your methodology, which is also inclusive. But you say that it should come from the direct face of the plan. That is fine. Our argument that your plan embodies the method of capitalism, that is what is bad. You have no distinction as to why that would not in fact be true. On the power grids argument. The first argument is the grid is weak now because of capitalism. Cross-apply the planned obsolescence arguments. The reason why the grid is failing is because they want to make sure that they are always relying on. We want to make sure they're always relying on increased technology, which is why technology just makes it bad, so that you actually have to buy newer things in the future. The second argument is that there's no sort of impact to this. They can still eat foods and grains. No reason as to why they eat hamburgers to be able to survive. But the third argument, the capital is the reason why it's happening in the first place. Because capital means China will always attack us in the first place. Because the reason why we have cyber attacks with China is because of capital. Because we have mass amounts of war fighting over resources. The next argument is that your argument about rising oil prices is inevitable because capitalization end up fighting against each other for profit. The next argument is that flash crashes are ridiculous. Why capitalism causes economic life to go a lot faster because mass amounts of profits mean that people go to markets before they should be, why the economy more. But also you say corporate fight is happening. Corporate fight is inevitable. Our argument is that first of all, the reason why California leaves to go to Arizona because they want to make more money, but also because the reason why Nike goes in other places because they want to be able to make more capital. The next argument is that argument that capitalism causes the world a whole lot faster because it fights over resources. On the rule argument. Their alternative causality is the rulism. The ASA point is going to be herbicide use argument is that in the world we don't actually in herbicide use just allows for the rural population to actually die. But also argument is that food deserts happen, but their argument is that it's because of capitalism. The reason why we end up pushing aside the rural bodies is because of rulism it's because of capitalism in the first place. They cannot make money off of rural areas. Their argument is to prove that we moved to Hollywood because that's where all the money is. That's why you can never be able to resolve because your plan is rooted in the capitalist ethic.
I want our topic case on top, their framework, the link debate, the alt, and then the alt solvency, the impacts, advantage 1, advantage 2.
Cool. Can you repeat that for me?
I would be happy to. It's our topic case, our framework on top. The negative framework, the links, the alternative, and the alternative solvency.
By alt solvency, you mean?
I have them float on the same sheet, but it'll be like permutations and then the alt solvency proper. But I'll signpost between those arguments. The impacts, advantage 1, advantage 2. Is everybody ready? You will be preferring the affirmative framework for a couple of reasons. First, that we provide the best access for the round for both teams. Our argument here is that you should be able to evaluate the impacts of both sides. We say that you should be evaluating them in an all-inclusive way. We say this is preferable both. First, because this allows us to actually create the most change. You can look to our first argument on fiat, that is an act of imagination that allows us to make changes in the future. Our argument here is that role-playing allows us to make changes in the future. The first argument here is that allows understanding the things like state structures and power structures allows us to and understand them is key to breaking them down. We have to be able to understand the way the world works in order to be able to change it. Necessarily means this is the best functionality. Second, we say this provides for the best approach. Our argument here is that by actually being able to break down these structures internally through these through the structures that already exist, we are able to break down things like capitalism better. You make arguments about why fiat disempowers us. We argue that only fiat actually discussing these issues and educating the world as a whole that actually enables us to change these necessary means that we should still be able to get access to the impacts that we articulate at the PMC. The reason you should extend the policy to benefits is the best framework. Our argument here is that they should be able to get access to their impacts and everything. We say that we necessarily need to weigh our app against them. Necessarily means that you should not be evaluating every arguments about why particularly bad means that we will defend the methodology of the affirmative. But when we make that justification, necessarily means we still get access around the last argument I want you to extend. No, we're good. The last argument, real quick, I want you to extend is the last argument that says that the PMC, if the PMC is silenced as a result of the framework shift, that necessarily is the most immediate impact around because it directly prevents anyone from any discussion actually happening. Necessarily means that you should be referring our framework, their framework. They say that the role of balance look is dialectical materialist. The first argument here is to say that they don't explain what this necessarily means. Our argument here is that they are just telling you to look at the historical facts. But we say that first we meet within this framework because we talk the entire advantage 2 talks about how the individuals of the role have been affected by these intrinsic factors. It means we now meet into your framework. It means that you not reject as their position. Second, we say that just looking at the historical output is never effective. We say that if you're only ever looking at the past, you can't make any change in the future. We say that you have to acknowledge that, but you need to necessarily make those changes. We have to understand the existing and look to the future in order to be able to make any changes. It means you would be preferring our framework. Is there anything else here that I need to do? The link debate?
They made that prior question argument.
They make an argument about this as a prior question. We said that you should be able to evaluate these two things together. We say the first, the evaluation of the policy implications necessary in order to be able to make the changes within this straight structure. These are the arguments we're making on our topic case petition. Second, we say that working within these, look to the affirmative necessary in order to be able to look at the broader implications means that we are able to make these changes in the future means that we still make them within your framework. The link to it. The first argument here is that we break down the capitalist structures that you talk about. The argument here is that we actually allow for a space where individuals can get away from things like the capitalist power grid and be able to get away from capitalist structures. The entirety of page 2 talks about how ruralists and the individuals are trying to separate themselves, but they are harmed by the fact that they can't actually support themselves. Necessarily mean that only the plan actually allows for individuals to self-actualize. Means that the plan breaks down the capitalist structure. Additionally, second, say that the plan the term that the plan resolves these issues of reformism. Our argument is that the status quo is only taking these tiny steps in the status quo can move to state level renewable portfolio standards. The next one is the that the states are trying to implement these forms of standards to help people who is not actually dealing with the argument. Our argument here is that by actually making the broader change in the and confronting these issues, we can actually break down capitalism better. The third argument here is that we break out of the third argument is the term that we break out of the profit motive that you are talking about. Our entirety of our advantage one talks about how the grid is built in such a way that's going to that causes collapses and prevents individuals from getting access to things that they necessarily need. Not only the plan is able to access, allow individuals to get access to those things, to be able to break down the part of the profit motive that you talk about.
We take away 65.2% of the energy that companies sell to individuals.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
The
The fourth argument here is that we actually break down the energy companies and the capitalist energy companies that you talk about. Our PMC talks about how 65% of energy is resolved through grounds for pumping the individual. It means those companies that you talk about are broken down as results of the plan. The last argument we make here is the terms case that the increasing efficiency magnifies the usage and shortages. First, we say that we solve this back. All of your arguments are based on the individual aspects. We resolve the root of the issue by allowing individuals to make their own heat and their own heat and electricity means that we break out of the structures that you talk about. Yeah.
You see that you break down the energy companies. Those same energy companies just go somewhere else. You're just shifting to a new form of energy.
We're breaking that down, man. We're getting out away from those and allowing individuals to self-actualize their own production. How? The alternative. The first argument is PERM, do the plan, and endorse the Marxist labor theory of value. PERM, do the plan, and endorse the Marxist labor theory of value. PERM solvency, the first argument here is that this function is that this breaks versus permutation that benefit dogmatism. The argument here is that the second wave feminism movement empirically proves that's just dogmatically holding your ideology only prevents any form of change. The argument here is that second wave feminism broke down because of the fact that the narrative of white women excluded the narrative of others who had different experience, and that this prevented access only by engaging in these different ideologies were able to solve. The second argument here is the Trojan horse net benefit that only was working within systems that were able to break down. The argument here is that Occupy Wall Street empirically proves that just relentlessly criticizing from the outside is never able to make any kind of solvency. It only allows for things like the capitalist power structures to isolate you and trivialize you. Necessarily means that only by working within these structures are we able to destroy this capitalist structure from the inside. Means that only the engagement within the plan are we able to resolve these issues.
They talk about the Zapatistas, the kind of homes that they talk about those individuals living
in. Additionally, the third argument is that this functions best with our alternative. The argument that you make about Zapatistas having self-sustaining homes use the technology that we are talking about, bronze house heat pumps, to be able to produce their own energy. Necessarily means that we provide better access to these to the breaking down of capitalism means that we solve best on the solvency proper. First argument is the disadvantage of the old transition wars. The argument, the little A here is that the collapse is not going to come to the status quo. Our argument here is that capitalism creates the increases in the efficiency of technology in order to be able to resolve many issues. Our argument here is you can put desalinization technology that capitalism allows for the production of research and development in order to be able to break down in order to allow for better energy. Water production means that the collapse is not going to happen in the status quo. Will be is that they're collapsing. They're collapsing the capitalist system. Our argument here is we don't have another system to transition to. They literally are telling you that we move to a post-capitalist system, but they don't tell you what that looks like, and they don't tell you how we get there. That means we argue that different countries are going to go to war as a result of this. The argument here is that even if you are collapsing this within the United States, still there are other countries that are going to be capitalists. Russia and China as an excellent example here, that they would necessarily try to attack the United States in order to claim that the resources that the United States is no longer going for means that you are going to cause the transition war. Additionally, we say to you that capitalism is straight up inevitable. The little A here is that individuals are so grounded within the capitalist system, there's no ability for them to break out. It means that capitalism is straight up inevitable, and you are not going to be able to access solvency. The impacts.
Just answer the deterrence case and go to the second.
They say that this terms case we already answered this back. It's the same efficiency argument. We check this back through actually allowing individuals to get away from the system as a whole means that we check back your argument about this terms case. Advantage 1. Literally, you can just group these all. Literally, these are all just cap turns case arguments. There's no independent argument that you need to look. You extend across all of our arguments. The individuals are not going to be able to get access to basic things they need. That's certain things that we still get access to solvency. Advantage 2. You make arguments about alternative causes. First, you just make this assertion about herbicides, but you don't actually explicate our argument here that individuals are not within the existing political structures means that we probably solve that alternative causes means that we solve that issue. In addition to say that you can extend the impacts here that we are able to access these arms.
Add 1, add 2. Then the alternative debate. You might want a separate sheet. I'm going to have disads and permutation. If you want to put those on another tab, that's fine. And then I'm going to go straight line by line down on the yellow's arguments. So add 1, add 2, alternative debate. Then the framework debate. We're going to start off with our framework sheet, then their framework sheet.
Say disad what?
Yeah, there'll be disads and permutation. So if you want those on a separate sheet, if that makes things easier for you, then just a heads up. Add 1, add 2, alternative, our framework sheet, their framework sheet, the links page, then the impacts page.
All those disads to the permanent before Corey's speech.
So are you going to?
Oh yeah, I'm starting off with my disads and perm, then we go.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. You got it. Everybody ready? Your decision is not between competing policy options, but about historical outlooks. Capitalism just continues to drive the crisis of contradictions. Your graph shows that the specific ways in which we try to address these sorts of problems is by increasing the amount of energy production, just redistributing. We just give subsidies so companies will now buy more energy, and then somehow they will redistribute it. That is the Jevons paradox. The more energy we produce, and we're not questioning the material allocation of these sorts of resources. Your Aff is just readjusting the lawn chairs on the Titanic, which is already sinking. Only the alternative is able to resolve the ruptures within capitalism and create a new epistemology. Onto the advantage. One of the grid. First of all, numerous alternate causalities are able to solve for riches. Number 2 says there's absolutely no impact to disadvantage. Nothing you can go for. You can also extend as number 4 says that inevitable China attack on your grids means that your F has absolutely no way of solving because it's still rooted within capitalism. China's attacking you specifically because they are trying to outcompete us because we're going after the same markets right now, which means that no way our business is able to solve this back. You also can extend across to the flash crashes and instantiation why the capitalist structure is always going to mean that energy production, even if it is increased temporarily, is only is only in the short term. Never in the long term. Economic collapse always means that increase in poverty and also is going to go collapse the rest of your other impacts. You also extend the corporate flight is absolutely inevitable, and also the capitalism is like the root cause of all these arguments. No impact on the advantage one, only risk that the alternative solves it back. Rulism. We do not merely make assertions. We say there are numerous causes to rulism, specifically in the ways in which the U.S. agrochemical companies have been dumping herbicides, specifically in their water tables right now, which are leading to an increase in causes and diseases. Also, the fact that there are food deserts now means that there is absolute infrastructure. We give nuanced analysis that suggests that the reason why we have rural instances in rural areas in the status quo is because there is absolutely no profit motive to actually build these sorts of places, which means that your subsidy are never able to solve back for advantage. You just give money to these companies, they just actually build more these type of feeding tubes that are selling people in Hollywood now and not into these specific rural areas means you have absolutely no way of solving back this impact. These are conceded arguments. It's game over. Now on the alternative. The first disadvantage of the alternative is prelocutionary silencing. The ace point is that claiming to do both just results in a hollow mirrors. By the way, the exact same opinion just infinitely. We just try to use capitalism, try to solve back for capitalism. We continue to operate with the same sort of epistemology, which just means that it's always resulting in this sort of liberal, this little sort of echo chamber. The ace point just means you're never able to solve back. You're never able to carve out a new space, which our specific solvency, number 2 says that it's absolutely essential to try to completely throw yourself into the rejection of capitalism in order to create out this new counter-hegemony, this new space. The second disadvantage is that capitalism is inertial. The ace point is that capitalism always is going to try to restabilize itself by credit for any sort of reforms. All your linked arguments are instantiations why this would be true. The populist reforms of William Jennings Bryan in the 19th century trying to stabilize parts of capitalism and also the U.S. and the state bank were always just later removed by the fat cats on Wall Street and also just allowed the creation of even more problematic standards in terms of Wall Street. The peace point, this means you're never actually was sold back then. You just continue to allow capitalism to just emerge as a new-headed hydra. The third disadvantage also is foot under the A split is if the material result of the permutation is a permanent value. The radical message of the alternative is always going to be silenced. The B split is empirically proven. Einstein's wife, when she died, the scientists never created any more new mathematical theorems. There's also a lot of evidence that suggests that she was absolutely critical in him creating new ideas. However, she never got any credit because there was a much stronger force that was actually absorb all the credit, which means your Aff function comes along and does the exact same thing. And footnotes aside the advocacy of the alternative, which we say is important. Line now. You say specifically that second wave feminism proves we need to have multiple ideologies. I would argue that strategic essentialism is absolutely important in this specific instance. We're arguing when you guys are arguments as to why capitalism is the root cause of all these sorts of vicious consecrated type of privilege that allows individuals to actually strip themselves specifically patriarchal. The next argument also is that this is empirically proven within feminism. The African women's suffrage movement is also incredibly essential in the ways in which they characterize structure balance. It still means that their methodology was absolutely important and able to make advances. Your number two arguments that we need to break down the system within the system occupy Wall Street. Our first arguments turn out to all occupy Wall Street so the factors never actually got anywhere. Our arguments specifically say Wall Street, it became let's occupy patriarchy, let's occupy Wall Street, let's occupy all these other different things and never actually made any sort of progress. The second argument also said they did try to engage within the state, and all they did was produce the Dodd-Frank bill, which just resulted in new regulations on individual companies, but never actually changed the root cause of the problem. That is the United States actually just backing sorts of mortgages that it can never create, and also the overarching greed structure of Wall Street, which means that you were able to slow back. You also specifically said that we're also, you say that our post-capitalist societies are using the exact same sort of technology you're talking about. Your Afro is giving billions of dollars in subsidies to private companies, not self-sustaining collectives right now, which means that this is not an argument for you. But furthermore, you also are conceding right now that there is a post-capitalist world outside, which means any sort of inevitability arguments you're making are absolutely empirically denied, and also means that capitalism is not inherently ingrained. All your arguments will be inherently ingrained in the capitalism got to be broken out are literally disproven in every single state with thousands of equal abilities. You also say that the collapse is not coming right now. You are conceding that capitalism produces extinction, which is always the reason why the collapse is always important right now. You say desalinization. I argue this sort of technology will only be for the type of rich people who have access to these types of resources. It never actually result in breaking other sorts of material gains. Next, you say also that other systems we can transition to. You are conceding for examples on the alternative page to prove this argument. You also say, or argue first of all that there's absolutely no. First of all, you say war other countries specifically are going to be capitalists. Our first argument is we're not trying to solve back for all capitalism. We're trying to solve back the historical outlooks that are the actual modes of truth that we're engaging in, and also that we're producing. You say also there's no way other countries will specifically transition. Our argument is that there's absolutely no uniqueness for this whatsoever. You say resource wars that are already happening right now. Russia just invaded the Ukraine, which means if capitalism is absolutely true in terms of actually stopping back for these sorts of wars, that probably should not have happened. Capitalism is the root cause of all these problems. Means the only way we can actually solve them back by breaking away. You say it's absolutely ingrained within us. The fact that there are thousands of equal abilities disproves this argument. Also, this is just biologically disproven. Individuals are not actually taught to be selfish from a young age. New individual studies say from the toddlers are far more altruistic and not inherently selfish. You also specifically, okay, that's all on the link debate. Or, I'm sorry, that's all on the alternative. Now, go to framework. You say we don't explain what this means. We do, in fact, explain what it means. We do. We repeat it twice. We also explain that it's specifically about challenging the material structures of commercial power. And also, you probably could have asked the question if you're confused in this. Our interpretation is how the role of the should evaluate the debate. You are conceding that the role of the should be to engage and the judge should operate as a historian. And also, you're not having any compelling reasons why you actually access this sort of interpretation. Furthermore, you say the historical outlook is bad because we never make changes. The alternative, first of all, is making this sort of change. And also, historical outlooks are essentially reducing the peculiarities are graphically oversimplifies the modes of rule of violence in certain areas. Your advantage proves this, and also the policy implementation is good. Policy implementation is a matter of what we just learn how to do as you feel like Dick Cheney, and never actually make the sort of responsible policy options that are essential. You can extend across number 2 argument says that insistence on this sort of policy avenues results in different form of paralysis. You also the average is a much broader perspective. The average is not broader, just results on an oversimplification. All of your conceded arguments on the advantages prove this. Therefore, first of all, let's start with the PMC as silence argument. You are allowed to defend your methodology. We're not silencing anything of you. We're not saying you don't get to any of your arguments. We're just saying you need to engage within methodology. No impact there. Furthermore, also, you're trying to silence the criticism by saying we need to evaluate everything through fiat anyways. It means there's no impact here. Also, no voting issue. No reason why it is specifically silencing the PMC matters. They say it's the most possible impact. No, a description of what that impact is. Now from the top. You say you provide the best access to individuals. Actually, no, let's go to the links page now. Fine, you can weigh your methodology. Links page. You say you break down capitalism, which allows capitalism to get access to the power grid. Our first argument is that specifically this is new instantiation of the types of performance, and more specifically talking about, you just allow capitalism to restabilize itself and also take all the credit. You also specifically say also these individual companies are just making more money. This sort of process means that you're able to sell this back. Your second argument says that you're engaging in more renewables and things like that, and how that is the reason why performance is good. However, that always just allows us to mask the fact that NPTE is increasing its own oil production and also increasing fracking, which allows for more types of fossil fuels to be produced. You also say that we're going to be breaking away from the profit motive. You never actually be able to break away with profit motive because you're just performing, just allows profit motive to be transitioned away, and also we break it away from 65% of the energy. That is absolutely not true. You give subsidies to individual companies means that they just not produce different forms of energy. You also say that this is specifically already bailed out these individuals from electricity. That is not true. The Jevons paradox answers all your link argument says that maximizing energy just produces shortages elsewhere. It means that never any time for us to actually break out of capitalism proper. Okay.
There will be an overview to begin the debate, and then we'll discuss the alternative on the links page, the impact page, and then the framework, our framework, and then their framework, and then the advantages of those.
Did you know what's that?
Not a problem. The alternative, the links debate, the impact debate, our framework, their framework, advantage one, advantage two. Everybody ready? We will win because you link to capitalism. Capitalism is the root cause of all your impacts. You can only win this, you can only win impact to the affirmative if you win that you resolve capitalism. You win that is not true. First of all, your plan text reads you will provide $40 billion for the installation of ground source heat pumps. I'm fairly certain some business has to actually go in there and install those things, which is why you do not break down notions of capital, because somebody's making money off these things. But also, we don't need that argument. You're flat conceding Jevons paradox. The idea of making things more efficient is only to allow for us to fuel this consumptive entity that we have more, because when the world where commodity prices decrease, we can just increase our consumption. That is bad. That is the imperial drive that capitalism embodies, which is why we end up destroying the ecology faster, we end up destroying the economy faster, which is why it turns the case into unsustainable. You do not have a reason why you will win on the link debate. But furthermore, the alternative is the same exact discussion. Let's go there now. Your permutation is not helping you in this instance. All of your arguments about dogmatism and the sort of Trojan horse and Occupy Wall Street do not make sense. Your argument that we should include multiple perspectives, our perspective is bad. That's like saying we will solve for the Black Panther Party by adding in Ku Klux Klan members. Our argument that is not the same thing. You have to win this reason as to why your methodology and ours coincide. They do not, because our alternative is the antithesis of your arguments. We are saying we should not promote capital. You promote capital, which is why you lose this debate. But also our argument is that, all of your arguments about why collapse is coming in the status quo is not true. Even if that weren't fact true, we still have alternatives. You're conceding the arguments about the Zapatistas. You're conceding the arguments about how capital determines knowledge. You're conceding arguments about how the earth modes already exist, which is why even if this class would just go somewhere else. Your resource wars are inevitable. You do not indict the fact that because of capital, we would just go to the nations much harder. You do not have an impact in this debate. There is no transition war because war's happening right now over resources. We are already fighting China over resources in South Sudan. We were also already Russia's already going in and invading Ukraine, which is why we reach one probability. There's no reason as to why if things are happening right, if we reach one time frame, if war's happening right now, we're able to resolve those inevitable wars in the status quo by having this. There is no transition war that's going to occur. You cannot win on this argument. Argument does not solve. On the links debate. We need two, as an overview, we need two things. First, your plan gives a subsidy, which goes to businesses to invest something, to build something. That is capital. That is somebody making money to make things more efficient. But you are conceding the Jevons paradox argument. This is a disaster permutation because it is indicative of the capital drive that we say is bad. Jevons paradox argument is about making things more efficient. Your own argument that these new things are much more efficient than we have in the status quo, which is why that drive for efficiency is what is bad. If you really reason as to why that is true, which we have, because you conceded it, is the reason why you linked this argument. The impact debate. They are saying that they break this down. They do not indict our impact arguments. They are true. They are 100% probable in this discussion. Capitalism creates inevitable violence, it culminates in extinction. Risk of that outweighs the entirety of the affirmative. It is the most probable. It's also on a time frame scale going to outweigh because it's happening right now. We're already moving towards extinction. The only way to be able to revert that back is to get the alternative. It's try or die for the alternative, but also it turns the case. Risk of it turning the case means you vote for us because there's nothing for you to be able to solve for. Our argument, the reason why the war areas are excluded right now is because we cannot make anybody any money. People rather go to Hollywood than go to these areas. On framework. I think Chase does a good enough job here as to why we are ahead on the framework. I only want one argument, and it's probably on their framework, and that is that this is not a reason to vote for you. At best, your argument about silencing the PMC is the reason why you get to evaluate your methodology. We are still beating you on why capitalism means you do not solve your app because your methodology is terrible, which is why we still mean you don't solve the case. The case debate then. The permutation would only be stellar where we actually had an impact to be able to solve for it. There's no disadd to the alternative because arguments about grid infrastructure mean that because plant obsolescence means we always just make bad technology, there's probably a chance to why you would be able to resolve your app, but also why it means that the grids will always we saw the root cause of why it happens in the first place, which is why we resolve these questions on realism. There are alternative causalities to realism, and the argument is that capitalism means that realism is bad. Inevitable because we just move away from them because we don't actually make any money. There's no impact to the app, you vote negative.
I would like my solvency sheet, advantage 2, and then all of the alt debate. I'm going to go on the disadds to the perm first, followed by the perm itself, and then the rest in order from core to speech, and then I want the links sheet.
The last thing was the links?
Yeah, the links page.
So your solvency, add to web page, then links.
Yep.
Okay.
Anybody need that one more time? This is going to be a pretty easy battle for Nevada today, at the point at which my opponents don't actually resolve the link scenario on the ruralism advantage. There are a couple of things that I need to pull out of the solvency first. First on the solvency, look to my first argument, the little b, where I'm saying that I'm providing this money to households in the United States. This money isn't directly going to companies. At best, they're getting a link of omission here, but this is not a direct link to capitalism because I'm providing this directly to the individuals that need it. It means I am recognizing them before the capitalist structure. Next, let's go to advantage 2. On realism, all of their arguments are just alternative causes, but at the point at which Corey's specific analysis is that this could be explained through the political structures that we are saying we resolve through the link scenario means that they never get access to these alternative sources because we claim solvency on the alternative sources that they isolated. The point at which they never respond to this, then we still have access to our link scenario means that we're still able to resolve the ruralism that exists right now is going to be pretty important for us when we get to the alternative sheet. Are you happy there, Corey?
Extend the impacts. The impacts are
Hold on. First, extend my fourth uniqueness point that ruralism is a place-based discrimination not encompassed by racism, sexism, or classism. Means that we probably, by resolving this and using this as our rhetoric, are trying to resolve the capitalist structure.
Point of order. The argument is made in the LOC that capitalism is the root cause. I have the MG conceding that argument. This new cross application of why there are sort of intersections of ruralism does not mean that you solve for capitalism via solving for ruralism.
I would argue that Corey's specific analysis is that everything they're talking about is encompassed within ruralism. I mean, maybe the phrasing is a little bit different, but that's the argument I have coming out of
Yeah,
Corey's.
it's like the third or the fourth link turn that we make on advantage. That if we reference these arguments, we don't specifically extend them here, but we're extending these as ruralism terms.
Yeah. You can go ahead and drop down to the impacts and extend that this is the logic of genocide and that this can only be resolved through the affirmative because only the affirmative creates the critical breaking point by which the government begins to recognize the difference between the rural and the urban, stops to recognize the difference between the rural and the urban and consolidates them and recognizes them as the same. Alright, onto the alternative sheet. Disadds first. On the first disadvantage, there are a couple of important responses. They say that we're using capitalism to solve. However, there are a couple of easy answers to this, that I am not necessarily using the capitalist structure explicitly, that I am sending this money to individuals means that individuals would potentially be able to build this themselves is a reason why you never need to evaluate the capitalist implications here, but also people are still going to need access to heat. Post-capitalism is a reason why this is probably only going to resolve the permutation. The next argument that they make is that this is...
It's inertial and we can't get
Right, no, there was a second argument that they make. There's something about not new space. We aren't creating a new space, but only by enabling these individuals to be able to live post-capitalism are we actually able to create the safe space in which an anti-capitalist world can live, and at the point at which ground source heat pumps enables that, then we are probably able to resolve this best, and this probably works best in favor of the permutation, not the alternative. The next that they say is that capitalism is inertial, but at the point at which the solvency functions under the alternative, it probably also functions under the permutation, because this is not some unique new form of capitalism that is being created by the plan, means that we are able to resolve it just as effectively through the alternative permutation that they are going for. The next dissent that they go for is footnoting. They say that this just silences the movement. However, this is not true, because we are only enabling it and providing for a clear path out of capitalism into a post-capitalist society where individuals are actually going to be able to live. The last argument that I want to make, I can't remember where it is, but they're talking about Jevons paradox, and this is resolved through the permutations. Corey says that this allows to break down the capitalist structure through the affirmative means that Jevons paradox really doesn't matter.
Point of order. Okay, so the Jevons paradox is an example in the dissent. I understand that now they think they have a chance to respond to it. Jevons paradox, though, still is a link argument that we are making, and that I'm extending in the MO as something that is conceded and is an instantiation of what they do. Them now saying, when we break down capitalism, we solve back to that link argument, seems to be them.
I would argue that while Corey might not have said on Jevons paradox, the argument that he makes in response to that link is the same, and regardless of how he labels it, it functions exactly the same. What he is saying is that by breaking down capitalism through the permutation, the Jevons paradox doesn't matter.
Yeah, and Jevons paradox only appeared on the alternative in the MO. They make the argument in the link level, which we respond to by saying that 65% of energy is resolved.
It's a panel, so.
Yeah, I'll take it into consideration.
Can I have your attention for a second?
Yeah.
All of these are resolved by the Zapatistas argument that we are...
Right, but all of these are going to be resolved by the Zapatistas argument that we are creating the homes that these individuals need to be able to live in the post-capitalist space. Let's go to the permutation debate. The first argument that I want of the permutation is the Trojan horse net benefit. Their only answer is that the Occupy Wall Street movement never got anywhere, but that is exactly Corey's argument, is that the Occupy Wall Street movement failed because it criticized it from the outside. Only by getting inside of the capitalist structures are we ever going to be able to break them down. This only proves that the permutation is the only way that we can possibly resolve capitalism, and the status quo is probably a reason why the affirmative team is winning the debate today. But next I want the Zapatistas argument under the solvency, that they say that this just gives, what are they saying? That this...
They straight concede the argument that we are what these homes rely on, and that allows for us to break out of capitalism.
Right, they straight concede the argument that this allows these individuals to break out of capitalism, means that we probably are the only team that is creating an actual, real safe space outside of capitalism, means that the affirmative team is winning the debate today. On the dissent of the alt, none of their arguments matter, none of them are terms, they're just mitigation. We don't need it. You want anything else there, Corey? Cool. On to the link sheet. On the first argument, their only argument is that this is a new extension of capitalism, but at the point at which we aren't creating new capitalism, all that we are doing is allowing individuals to break out of it. This is probably answered back by the Zapatistas argument. The next argument that they go for is that the United States is just going to increase its oil production later, but at the point at which we are saying that we can get into a post-capitalist society, this is probably resolved through the permutation. The next argument that they go for is that we are not breaking...
Just extend the term ruralism.
Right, extend the term that ruralism is going to resolve this. At the point at which we are breaking down these rural discrimination, we're probably resolving this classist discrimination as well. And then their last argument is that people are going to manage to produce their own energy, and that somehow this is going to lead to shortages elsewhere, but at the point at which the capitalist system is broken down through the permutation, that argument really doesn't matter.
Okay, congratulations everyone, it was a really good debate. Going to be a 3-0 for the Neg Concordia. For me, I start with the links page. I think the Neg is definitely winning. The Neg's definitely winning a link that you're an instantiation of reformism that pushes off the revolution. I also think it's very probable that companies will have to be involved, even though you do go hard with this argument, which I think is smart to go for what you're doing for people. The geothermal heat pumps are a pretty complicated piece of machinery, which might be a good argument to make. That just to give yourself a little bit more of a shield if you're ahead in warrants on a lot of these parts of the debate, but just to be safe. Like I said, just being like, I'm sure companies that would be like, think about, the average citizen can dig a hole and understands how to set up, a heat pump on another home. Then I go to the impacts. I think there's, if the Neg does win all the impacts, will turn out some of the case. On the disadds to the perm, I think there's a high risk the perm isn't quote-unquote throwing yourself into the system enough. I think that you're a little defensive on there. And I think that the inertia argument is you're a little behind on. I think it jives really well with throwing yourself into the system on the link page. And And I also think there's a risk of footnoting, just because you say it's not true, we give a clear path, but they give this Einstein and his wife example, which is just a little bit more specific. And then on the perm itself, I think that they're ahead because you say that your argument is that you know, that we have to work within the system. Their argument is that Occupy got some sort of change. It just resulted in the Dodd-Frank bill, which still didn't do anything. You don't answer that Dodd-Frank bill. So at the end of the day, I don't think the perm would solve the critique. I think the critique turns the case. So I thought it was a really, really good debate. I thought you went really hard on the BMR.
Thank you. Just the last part I heard is fairly similar, but so I think the Aff is behind on the root cause debates. Obviously, the paradox argument is a huge winner. Because I mean, once you're simply like, we make it more efficient, you know, and they're like, yeah, that's more efficiency. That makes it where we consume more. That's pretty bad, you know. For me, I think what you guys, and then the perms, I don't. You're just again the footnote argument as well. So this adds to the perms. I think they're just giving some more nuance. You're trying to win out with this rulism advantage, but I mean, they're just beating you at the root cause debate of like rulism is just the end effect of capitalism. You're trying to do this reformism, incrementalism kind of solves role. We're starting, we're the springboard, we're breaking it from the inside, you know, that type of stuff. I think that's coming out a little too late. In my opinion, this is just me in the back of the room. When someone runs CAP or something like that, just dig in and say, yeah, fuck you. CAP is awesome, yep, it's great, and you're right, we're helping stuff. In fact, I thought you kicking out of transition wars was probably, I don't know if you looked at me, but I would kind of want, you know, because I think transition wars was kind of your, at least a chance there on the solvency to be like, no. But see, to really win that argument, you've got to push all in on CAP is good, CAP's going to save the day, and by the way, these transition wars that you guys are going to trigger, if you get everything in your happy land, you even have this alternate way we can exist, it's just that alternate way is going to really suck. Yeah. And then if you dig in on that, then maybe you got a chance. But for me, it's just they say CAP bad, you say CAP good. Just give a million ways. And your app is the link to that from the beginning. You're like, no, capitalism's good. It's how we're going to save these rural people. It's how we're going to save everything. Take your common Marcus crap and get the hell out. But, you know, I tell Joe Allen that all the time.
He didn't want us to read this because he thought you'd like capitalism a lot. And that's what he knows this conversation is kind of pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, he probably told you the opposite of that.
Yeah, my comments are similar to what they said. What I wrote as the RFD is that they're winning the framework role of ballot is to be a historian, so dialectical materialism. So then I go to the permutations, and the permutation that you end up, they put defense on your permutation, which is they engaged the state, which created the Dodd-Frank bill, which had no regulations. And I don't think that you guys handled it wrong with the PMR. I think that was probably the reason why you didn't go back that part. But also the splintering message, the Einstein analysis, I think that was also unanswered. So I have a dissent to the permutation, defense of the perm that you guys are going for, and then the offense that you are going for on the alternative, which is the transition wars, which is what Double D said. You're not going for it, which I think is the biggest offense that you guys have, as opposed to just the permutations. I mean,
One more comment I meant to make was that in a world where they don't have value to life claims, you make this about time frame. They do not, like they read non-uniques to resource wars because Russia and Ukraine or whoever's going out to war. You'd be like, no, in a world where capitalism collapses, everything fucking goes nuts. Nuclear bombs are launched. In a world of slow, at least we're going to survive a little bit, so at least human life lasts a little bit longer. We still have a value to life. So that might be a reason to put value to life arguments in your critique. Yeah. Good job, everybody.
All right. Thank you all.